Hello, welcome to Flory Models. I'm Philip Flory. Another sort of mega build for this particular one. There's a lot going to be happening with this actual build. A lot of the time we just do straightforward out-the-box builds, and then other ones such as the Phantom and models kits like that and the Chinook, we really go to town on them. And this is one of those cases. We got a lot of stuff here. I'll just give you a run through of what the basic outline of the build's going to be, what we're going to use, and a run through of all the little bits. We're going to be doing the Israeli F-16I Suffer. Now this is the two-seat version. It has the CFTs, the conformal fuel tanks. It has the spine on it and all the rest of it. Now there's lots of aftermarket bits out there. Some of them are sort of really necessary. Some of them you don't really need them. Obviously necessary, you're going to need the kit, and we'll have a run through that in a moment, but we have got some of the accessories that go with it, which I'm hoping are really going to sort of liven this one particularly up. If we start at the top here, starting off with, we've got Isracast have done a correction set, for want of a better word, for the kit itself, because a lot of these lumps and bumps you see on the nose and things like that are actually wrong, slightly out of shape perhaps, or you know, just a few little things. This is a correction set that's obviously got nicely resined pieces, like a completely different nose wheel door and the wheel itself, which is something we've got over there as well. But various things like that. So it's quite a handy little set to have. And say a few of the little nodules and that are actually wrong on the kit. So that's the first piece. Second, after that, we've got from Isracast again, we've got the correct weapons pylons for it as well, because their ones are slightly different for like a TIA or a triple ejection rack. They're just a little bit different. So we've got the resin version of it here. So that's that one. We've actually got a set of resin wheels. Now these are from Wheeland, which is Aries. Very nicely cast main gear and nose wheels. So obviously we've got two nose wheels now. But this one's got the writing on the sides if you wanted to highlight it. And again, they're resin, so they're very nice like that. We've got the main gear wheel well itself, which is obviously a lot more detailed than the kit part itself. It's a straightforward drop-in fit, and obviously you get the nose wheel one as well. Now for this particular kit, we're going to be playing with a lot of electrics in this one for doing some of the lighting on it, which is something we'll talk about in a moment. So we might be sort of using it, we might not. Obviously it depends on how we go through. We've got the big fuel tanks. These are huge fuel tanks actually on the F-16I. Now the thing is, the kit itself does come with the 600-gallon tanks. So we've got here, these are vac form ones, as well as actually got the resin pylon itself comes with the kit. So we might use them, might not. Obviously it depends on how we're going to arm this thing as well, because we might have the triple ejector racks on the inside panels. We're not sure yet. So anyway, we've got the base covered by getting it. The cockpit. Now, this is the other thing as well, because we're going to be having this cockpit fully lit. It's going to have all the TV screens inside, or the CFTs inside, CRTs inside. We're going to have obviously then a lot of instrumentation, perhaps some of the lights down the side consoles and everything else like that, and it is going to have a crew in it, because it's something we're going to speak about in a minute. So we might be using this, we might not, whichever way. I'm going to paint it and show you anyway. So that's one done. Now from Marcus Jellyman, we've got the lights. Now we'll go through this in incredible detail a little bit later on, but basically what we've got here is a microchip on this one that's been programmed with the correct flashing sequences for the F-16, because obviously some of the ones we've got obviously up on the tail, you've got the big pulsing one that goes off and things like that. So we've actually got those programmed on a microchip, which then have got LEDs, so we can feed fibre optics or a little small LED itself out to the various areas. We've got two types. We've got one which is a steady one, which is basically permanent for the instrumentation and things like that in the cockpit. Then we've got another one which has obviously got all the flashing lights and things like that. But obviously we'll go through a lot more in detail about those a bit later on. We've got various lengths of fibre optic. So this is clear plastic, which is fibre optic, so obviously we can cut those to length very carefully, and that's what's going to be showing our lights. Obviously you've got some big thick ones for doing the main lights, nose wheel light, things like that, and then we've got some thin ones here for doing the actual instruments and things like that. The kit itself, okay, now this is obviously a very large kit, as you can imagine. Now, Academy did this kit some years ago. Just move that out of the way. Now they did this particular kit, and don't get me wrong, it was a lovely kit and everything else like that, but it had a few little weak spots. What they've actually done is retooled that kit up and improved on it in various areas. Just move that all out of the way. First thing you do, you get this extra complete bag of bits. It's two, it's identical. This is the weapons. This here has the 600-gallon fuel tanks. We have the Python air-to-air missiles instead of Sidewinders, and obviously some of the other weapons that you have. So we have GPU guided bombs, as well as laser guided and TV guided as well. So between them all, you've really got all the Israeli weaponry set covered quite nicely. And then obviously, yeah, if you wanted to, there's a lot more out there, but we've got small diameter bombs and things like that in here as well. As I said, very nicely done, very nicely cast, and obviously in a big scale as well. This is where obviously you get the differences with the kit. So obviously we've got two types of intakes, we've got two types of wheel well, things like that. And immediately look at the wheel well, they're quite basic, but obviously we'll be replacing these with resin ones as well. Because it is an updated kit, obviously you've got some parts for the single seat, some for the dual seat and things like that. So as you can imagine, as you work your way through, some screws are going to be totally new, obviously like this one, we have the two-seater. Obviously cockpit, it is one whole piece. It's not like the Tamiya kit where it's the front half and back half. This is an entire new front. So this is a new screw to the kit. Crew, nice little touch. We've got a bag full of crew here and some of the little pylons on there. But basically the crew, you've got them standing, seated and everything else. So obviously we'll be using the seated ones for this. Here's another of the new sprues. So we've got the full spine off in here, which is lying in this bag here, and obviously a new nose section as well. Next in, we've got some of the more standard. So this part here, if you wanted to, you could actually make the DGA version, which is the American sort of standard Block 50, 52 F-16. So obviously you've got the small fuel tanks and everything else like that. So you could work your way through just like that. Standard, obviously, on the old wings and everything else like that, so it's a standard piece here. But in here we have got, again, the conformal fuel tanks which fit along the spine, a very nice touch. And in here, on this particular sprue, is obviously the one for the two seats. So obviously we've got the two-seat cockpit, we've got two sets of ejector seats, we've got the canopy framing and some of the lumps and bumps that are going to go on this particular aircraft as well. So, really much in there. And on here, this is really for the US version, but you've got the standard fuel tanks that go with them, laser guided bombs, we've got HARM missiles, we've got the obviously the US version of the TIA or the triple ejection rack, their pylons as well. I think it's just mirrored on the other side. So there's that one. You do get, which is actually a very nice touch, but the artwork, we get a poster in the kit, which is very nice as well, bit of inspiration. Okay, then we just pull that up away. As I say, you need a big workbench. You get your box bits, as I always call it, which is sellotape. So in here we've actually got a bag. It's got our clear part, which I must admit I would like it if it was probably not rolling around the bag loose in here and fixed in some ways, but it is in a separate box, I suppose. We've got all the clear parts for the actual weapons and obviously the lights and things like that. We've also got a photo etch piece which has got the actual strengthening plates. Now these are the strengthening plates that go on the fuselage, around the nose and things like that, and we've got a couple of plates there which are for photo etch, for the actual chaff buckets, which are on this one are fitted to the spine. We've got a mirror image, again rolling around loose, which isn't ideal. This has got the smoke canopy. Now the smoke canopy, it's not like a tint for the pilots, it's actually supposed to absorb some of the radar reflection and stops it bouncing back to the side. So obviously if you look at some of them, they all have pretty much the actual smoked canopy on them. I'm not too sure about obviously the Israeli ones. The Israeli ones I think carry the clear. The only thing is there is a seam line running through both the middles of these, so I'll be showing you how to get rid of those, which isn't ideal, but the way that they're actually moulded is very hard to get around. The thing is they do look extremely clear, which is a very, very nice touch. So anyway, that is the basics of it. What are we going to do? Well, in a nutshell, what we're going to try and do with this particular one is have this obviously fully lit, as we've said before. We'll be going through a lot of the parts. We'll be going through a lot of the parts, as you can imagine, but what I want to do with this particular one is give it a bit of a twist on something we haven't done before. So actually what we're going to do, we're going to come along and we're going to literally have this one in a sort of diorama. So by diorama, what we actually mean is we're going to be fitting this one to a base. Now, fitting it to the base itself isn't a problem. We've done it many times before. The only thing we're going to slightly do different on this particular one is that we're going to have this one in a landing configuration. So what we're going to do, we're going to have the mate have a board done with a blurred runway so it looks like it's moving. We're going to have the F-16 coming down with his back wheels actually on the ground, speed brakes deployed, everything out the back, obviously all the lights flashing and everything else like that, literally as it is just touched down on the runway. So the nose wheel will be in the air. So we've got a few little things to do. Obviously fully wiring this thing up shouldn't be too much of a problem, but obviously we'll have to, you know, make sure we've got it all working and everything else as we go along. Secondly, we need to think of a way of actually fixing it to the base so the nose wheel is in the air. If you buy the Tamiya kit, you've got metal undercarriage which actually bolts and physically screws to the wheel wells, which in turn screws to the fuselage. This particular kit doesn't have that luxury, it's on plastic. Obviously the weight itself of this cockpit, if we're going to use the resin one on its own, we just get this cockpit out in here, as you can see, is one lump of cast resin. It's extremely heavy, and okay, we're going to be taking off this bottom bit, but it's still heavy. So by the time we get all the lumps and bumps, it's going to be a lot of stress. So what we tend to do, this one will probably have a centerline fuel tank, okay, with an acrylic rod, which will hopefully take most of the weight. And obviously the acrylic rod being clear, you won't really see it. And I'm hoping it's going to be extremely close to the ground as well, which will go right the way up through the actual area itself into the fuselage, and then it can all be sort of super glued or, you know, actually resined into place back there and take care of it. But that is the plan, to have it up in the thing. Nose wheel light will be on, obviously all the navigation lights, flashing lights on the tail and on the rear as well, everything else like that. Fully lit cockpit, so it looks like she's just come home and literally just touched down on the runway. So that is the plan with it. So now all we've got to do is build it. Okay, now, as we said before, we're not 100% sure if we're going to use the resin cockpit yet, purely because of one, of weight, and secondly for the wiring. But we're going to build it anyway, as I said, and that way we can show you in all the glories of working with resin, things to avoid, things that are sort of good, things that are bad. Bad thing is with resin is dust. Okay, resin dust is very, very toxic. It's lethal. It gets in your lungs, it gets up to everywhere, and it's not very healthy for you at all. So you don't want to be breathing this in all the time. If you can, do it outside and do it with a respirator on. Something like this will do quite adequately, and do it outside. Doing it outside as well saves a lot of mess inside as well. Okay, big thing with using resin is that they're going to come on big resin blocks. Now you see I've been around with a Sharpie just to show you guys where to cut. Always do it with a Sharpie first, okay? Two things that happen, you know, I've been building donkey's years now and I still occasionally cut the wrong thing. If you do it with a Sharpie, you can then think, hold on, it's going to go wrong, it's going to look horrible. Okay, things to remember. If you've got a curved bottom, the resin won't allow for it. So if you've got like a situation with this block on here on the base that's got to go, if you was to chop straight ahead, you might take out some detail and end up going through the cockpit floor. Now this one, to be honest, that's never going to happen. But a lot of them are a lot more fragile, especially the 148 ones, where if you used to cut straight, okay, or just straight down, then what can happen is you end up coming through the floor. And it has happened to me in the past. So by doing it with Sharpie, you can see how much curve it's got on it, and you can allow perhaps step back a bit and then trim down, okay? Other things you have to watch out for, especially on things that are thin, is this type of effect where you've got the front bit here and you think, yeah, okay, that's all well and good, you know, we've got this sorted. But when you look at the back, okay, it comes a lot further forward. So if you used to cut down that line there, you'd end up taking a good sort of 2 or 3 mil off the end of your item. So that side, I've done it in red, I know I need to cut that side, and then what I have to do is sand out that bit, okay? Same with all the others, we've gone round them, because obviously if you used to cut down in this one, we'd have the same effect, we'd just chop down in there and end up taking the front of the instrument panel off. So that is a nice way. If you do it with the Sharpie, you can then have a look, take a step back almost, and see where it's to. Now I'm just going to do 1 or 2, and then I'll do the rest outside. But basically, tools you need, a razor saw, got a nice big one, which is great for going through something like this. So what we will do is literally come across here and we'll literally just saw straight through it, then we can trim and tidy up afterwards, okay? So a nice big Tamiya saw, never did anybody any harm. The only thing is the blade is quite thick, so you might have to allow for that when you're chopping around. The other one is to use something like this. Now this is a razor saw. Now I've modified mine slightly because instead of having the blade back here over both holes, I've put it forward. That way I can just sort of go down like this, okay, and cut your way absolutely through it. The other one is, I'm just looking for it, actually I don't think I've it's not actually there at the moment, I will dig it out later, is another one. You can get a little razor saw, which is just a blade on its own, and you can, there again, carve down and do it just like that, which is quite a handy little one. That's made by Trumpeter. It looks a little bit like this guy here. So then, obviously a good old-fashioned knife, never hurt anybody, for scoring, and you can chop down it like that. Now, if you're doing something where you've got a tab hanging out, if you want to keep the tab, obviously it's not essential, you could probably get away with not using it, but the easiest way is obviously to come along like this, cut the outside piece first. Okay, and with a razor saw, it doesn't take too much, so then you're in, you can literally just, once you're halfway through, crank it off, okay, and then you can cut the other bits. So we'll just come down one way, then the other, we'll do the same on the other half. One, and then two. Okay, so that's that one cut off just like that, so it's a good, but we've still got this back. Okay, so then the back, two options. You can either cut it with a razor saw and go straight down, which like this, we use the bigger teeth. Okay, just be careful when working with resin, because, you know, it's one of those things, it's quite easy to get them snap and things. Normally I wouldn't attempt something like this, but for the purpose of showing you guys, we'll just pop down here. Okay, slightly going a bit skew with, but it's on the outside, so we can get away with it. So just down through the other one. And using a razor saw, you get a very small, very neat cut, just like this. Okay, so there we go. That's the back bit off, and then all we can do is actually just come along with a coarse sanding stick, okay, and sand the back down flat, so it's all like the rest of it. You can just come in, but say normally you'd be doing this outside and with a mask on. I'm literally just going to do the one to show you. Just coming down. Okay, and then you can use your sanding stick to just tidy up those edges, and there we go. That piece now is ready to go on, and then what will happen is it will come along. It'll probably stick in one of these sides. It's going to be this rear one, and it will go on in here like this. And because it's flat to the outside, it means it's got no bits sticking out, which are going to affect the side of the kit when it goes on. So that is it. The instructions are always pretty good on these things. Where are we? And they show you normally where to cut. You've got some nice red outlines as well, they've done it as well, which show you where to cut. But as I said, always check them first as you go through. I'm going to assume on this build that you've got some general modelling skills, and this isn't your first time working with something mass, because obviously the other thing as well, these can be sort of 35, 40 pounds a time. By the time you put it with the kit, there's 100, you know, and then obviously with all the other bits, you're probably doing 200 pounds worth of stuff here, so you don't want to mess it up. It's going to be a nice slow build, take your time and everything else. Okay, so I don't want to rush it any more than anybody else would. But basically, that's what we're going to do. Some cuts are a lot easier to do than others. What I tend to do is cut all the way through, just like that. Okay, afterwards you can come along with a sanding stick just to tidy up any areas, things like that. So what we're going to do now, we're going to go around and cut out all the bits, okay? Going to leave the seats for the moment, we'll do those afterwards. We're going to get the cockpit area sort of halfway assembled, then we can get it painted, detailed and everything else like that, and look how we're going to fit the electrics. But that's the basics of cutting out resin. As I say, just take your time, well ventilated, and if you can, do it outside. Okay, so, excuse me, back in from outside, we've had a good clean down as well, because I did a bit more sanding here using a damp cloth and a hoover. Make sure your bits go in a box before you put a hoover near your workbench. Okay, now, do you remember a few minutes ago when I was saying about be careful how you cut along the bottom here, because you might go through? Well, if I bring you in a little bit close, I can show you what I mean. What you actually get sometimes, you have to go really, really close. So we've got two little holes appearing in here, and we got them down in here as well. But the thing is, the seat's going to hide that. We've got the seat backs are going to come in. and they're going to take care of that just like that. So we're not going to see those. Unfortunately, I broke my own golden rule, went straight through the floor. Okay, there again, it's not a mass panic because you're going to come along with the seat and the seat is going to fit right over the top of it, so you're not going to see it. But I have got the offending bit, I've got it off the block. Okay, so if you wanted to, you could just come along now and glue this bit back in. Okay, we could glue it in the bottom there and nobody would be none the wiser. Okay, I'm not going to worry about it, as I said, because the seat's going to go in there anyway. But there is a good reason for going in so close, because too many times there's a couple of tabs at the front you need to remove. Just take them out. The rest of it is all fine. You've got two locating tabs down the back here. They go in the ones in the back, and literally it's a lovely close fit, and they go in there just like so, giving you your tub. Now the problem is, hold aside, okay, when you come along and place the top on, as you'll see, when you look down the end here, there is very, very little room, okay, and you'll see literally the reason we got a little bit close is down the back here. This is one lump in there, so you have to get extremely close because of the bottom here is obviously the bottom there, so it does go right up to the wire on this one, but all too many times this is the case because obviously you need to remove a bit of that resin to do it. So honestly, if you take your time with it, make your cuts and then just sand test fit, but we've got it in there now, so these, when you pull them together, go in there. But honestly, you can, I've touched that, there is no gap, that is solid one piece between the two now, how that is. And obviously I've got the added problem is somehow I've got to run cables down the front to the back and all the rest of it. It's going to be a little bit tricky how we go in. I have got a couple of things on my side. Firstly is that I'm not going to have the radar open, obviously, because we're going to be doing this in flight. So I can fit then the LED in the front here and run the cables in the direction, so I can hopefully run them down in channels underneath the seats, come up for the rear one and the front one and things like that, and obviously the nose will light as well. But if you aren't worried, if you're not doing lighting and things like that and you are doing it with the nose open, obviously there's a very nice radar that's going to go in the front here and you can have the nose open and things like that, but obviously ours will be in flight. So anyway, that's how we're sitting at the moment. I've gone around and cleaned all these up. Now these bits of red, you can see, best to get rid of them because they don't like paint. They tend to go back to being a liquid, and if you are using grey paint, obviously it'll come out with a pink tinge. The rest of them have all come up pretty nicely, I do have to say. So we're all happy how it is now. We've got all these parts all cleaned up and dust free and everything else. Now another thing with resin that you can get is sometimes the release agent is like an oily substance you'll find on the resin. It's literally just to get it out of the mould. It slips out of the mould a lot easier. Okay, that can play havoc with oil paints especially. Acrylic I find you can go right over the top as long as it's a good coat and you don't have too much problems, but certainly when you're using enamel paints, they do tend to react with each other. Way around that, nice soapy bath, put it into some mild dishwasher detergent, give it a rub around with a soft brush, take it out, rinse under the cold tap, okay, and then obviously you can just leave it in the air to dry, or just blow it with an airbrush to dry it off and let it air dry. Don't put it in hot water because resin, it will go very, very soft and floppy, and literally I've had it before where they will bend. When it sets hard again and you're out of shape and you end up having to reheat it and try and get it all square. So there you go. Right, so what we're into the situation now is obviously for painting. Obviously references are your best bet for all these things. One of the best references you can get for an F16 is this. Now this is a book by Jake Melfi. And he has got an absolute fantastic eye for getting just what the modeler needs, okay? So basically you go through and anything you can imagine, pictures of everything, absolutely everything, cockpits, everything else. So all those reference photos, you go around taking at air shows and museums and all the rest of it, they're all here and a lot better and a lot clearer. And things like we need is obviously the cockpit. Now obviously the F-16 is built under license and things like that all around the world. But basically they all follow the same general sort of pattern and then get a little bit more detailed afterwards. So what we're going to do now, we're going to literally start to put this roughly together so we're in a hole, just to make it a little bit easier for painting. And then obviously we need to open up some of these things, as you can imagine, because we're going to be having literally LEDs lighting up the cockpit so it looks like it's a light. So multifunction displays, they need to be opened up and sorted out like that, and various little bits and pieces that are all over this one. So if you wanted to, you could sort of put it together now by putting in things like the seat backs, can go in once the seat backs are in, and they can all be sprayed as a whole, or you can spray them as separate and then put them in afterwards. You will be using super glue to put these together, and most of the times you can use a PVA glue. Super glue, you do get a little bit of fogging, so if you get it together now, it takes care of any fogging. But to be honest, with fogging, where you get that little white thing around, you can get rid of that with a little bit of wash and various things like that. Okay, now slide will get a little bit complicated here, but just sort of bear with me. Now, those of you who've watched the F4 build, where we did a basic electrics set into that, will get a rough idea of what's going on. And therefore, if you saw the Corsair build, you would see we did the full LEDs and the instrument lighting on that one as well. You know, you can see him in these pictures. It's quite good. It works fantastically well on those aircraft, but this one we're trying to take to the next level. So, okay, what's really going to happen? Let me just explain in sort of layman's terms what's going to happen. Now in here we've got two very bright LEDs, okay? Now they're in a little bit of copper pipe, and that's just basically, it's easier to bunch fibre optics to put them in, and it gets them all resting in the right area. Otherwise you've got the thing of them tipping around, and with fibre optics, if you're not completely lined up, it just doesn't work, okay? On here we've got a capacitor back here, which basically just changes the brightness, just brings it down a bit, because without it these things are extremely bright. The other thing as well, obviously it makes the LEDs last a long time, and obviously therefore the battery and things like that. Now there's two things going on with this particular build at the moment. We've got the cockpit one, which we're doing now. We've also got this other little setup here we spoke about earlier, which is a microchip, which has got on here a tiny little LED. You probably see it pulsing there. We bring it a little bit closer, you can probably see it flashing here. Just dropping everything off the bench slightly out of shot. So we've got this LED, which is absolutely great, pulsing away. That's going to go actually on the top of the tail and be the strobe light. Okay, and then at the same time we've got two more LEDs down here. Okay, you might see one has got a slow pulse, and the other one has got a very, very fast pulse. I won't do it directly at the camera because it tends to play havoc with the camera. But as you see, so we've got one for this one on here. We'll do the navigation lights when they're pulsing. And then obviously we've got a nice little strobe quick one, which will be for the back of the tail, and the belly one as well. So that's those taken care of. So between all three of those, flashing away quite nicely, they are for the navigation aids. Now that particular setup will sit at the back of the aircraft in the spine area, or behind the actual wheel wells between that and the engine. So we've got plenty of room for mounting this little setup in there with a little chip. Now don't worry about full details on this microchip of how to get hold of it and everything else. That will come up later on in the show as the video builds progress and everything else, because to be honest, this is the prototype version of something that we happen to be, or Marcus Jellyman will be marketing with his own company. So I'm sort of just the guinea pig here, using the first one through. But basically your setup will come basically the same. You'll get the microchip on here, an assortment of flashes. Now this one as well is 12 volt and plugs in the mains. So anyway, this is the setup we're concentrating on at the moment. Now, as I say, we've got two LEDs, they're the same brightness back here, and we've got another twin one, which is going to be the nose wheel light. Okay, same thing again, we've got a reducer down here, capacitor down there. So what we're actually doing now is feeding through the fibre optics. So all we've done at the moment, we've come along. It's one of those things, it's really boring if I had to sort of film and show you, so it's easier to sort of recap. So basically what we've actually got, let me pull these out here, I've got a couple of strips of, this is I do believe 1.5 millimetre fibre optic cable, so it's nice and clear. The only trouble with this stuff is it's very thick, okay? Now, things to remember. Obviously, depending on how you cut the end will depend how much light comes through. Now for this we're trying to do an instrument, so what I've done is I've used a little bit of sandpaper and just scraped up the ends to dull them down a bit. Otherwise it's like a needle of light, which is too strong. The other thing as well, if you butt them up against something, you'll have a perfect circle of light and the rest of it won't be there. So what we've done at the moment, we've taken the back of the instrument panel like here, okay, and what we've done, we've put in a couple of holes running down the back. So this fibre optic cable will just run in here, okay, and we'll go in the back one and go in the back two, just like this. Okay, now we've opened up the ends of them. You probably see just beveled them out a little bit, just so it's got the light, it's got time to diffuse and get around. At the same time, we've gone around and we've done the actual instrument panel, and all we've done is put two holes in there, okay, so it's still got a little bit of an edge, so we can actually put some either clear film or the decal itself on there, will sit in there. Okay, these lights are countersunk back, so they go through, and hopefully, I've just got to try and hold it all together and show you guys at the same time. Hopefully you can see that's how they'll be. So they're sunk down at the back, okay, just like this. These will come up and we'll have the carrier film on there, so the lights will project through. Now I've got two more on the go here. I've got this little one up here at the top for the radar warning receiver, and I've got the one in the middle for the actual artificial horizon. We'll have a smaller little, you know, literally 0.5mm fibre optic cable will go through. Okay, you still with me? So basically we have our light source. Now this light source is going to go and be in the nose section where the radar is, in front of everything. So if you imagine we've got a situation where this is going to sit down in here, okay, and we in here just like this, okay. Normally you'd have the radar then is going to sit on the end here, and we've got no room for the actual fibre optics itself. So what's going to happen is, between the fibre optics are going to sit in here just like this. The cables from the back, obviously we'll cut them to length and drill holes, will come through, sit on the top and light up the front cockpit. The secondary ones for the rear cockpit are going to run along the tops here, okay, in amongst the actual here, and become part of the actual wiring itself. Because don't forget, great thing with fibre optics, as long as you don't paint the ends, you can paint the rest of it to look like cabling. Okay, and then they will run up and come up the back. At the same time, if you're feeling very clever, you can go along and put them in for where there are lights. But to be honest, F-16s, they don't have millions of lights down the sides here. It does tend to be on the front instrument, and obviously with the advent of night vision goggles, you don't need lights anywhere anyway, because obviously it blinds out the pilot. So that is basically how it's going to fit in. It sounds a lot more complicated than it is. If you've got the setup all done for you like this, thankfully Marcus has done it already for me, I've just got to install it and come up with the way. But what I did find in previous builds is, if you have the fibre optics actually push up too close to the instrument, you're limited on how it looks, okay? That way is, there's no diffuse light from the side, it's pure. Just a pinprick of light comes off of these. It's not like a torch and you get a fan, so you need to draw them back a long way to give a slightly wider spread. Otherwise, if you have them butting up like I did on a previous build, you are limited to just literally that one instrument. This way we're trying to give an overall effect of like a TV monitor, you know, with the cathode tubes are actually on, green light coming off of them. Perhaps we'll put in some little bits and pieces to look like instrumentation, but there again, it's going to be an effect rather than a working instrument, because obviously it's tiny, it's going to be behind the cone, and the only way you're going to see it is to stick your head right back behind the cockpit and to see it all lit up and everything else like that. So what I'm going to do, I'm just literally going to make a couple of small little channels down in here as well, so the cables can obviously come through, because they're going to sit in here just like this. So we need to open up here literally in front. Nobody's going to see it, so it's not going to harm anything. Okay, so when that is sat on the front, they've got something to run to and just go in, and then we can obviously install the other ones. But what we want to do is get them all dug out and put in and everything, so that way we can just dismantle it, paint the entire lot as a whole, feed the cables in, put it all down as the final thing, and that one's done.